So our faces is one channel. You know, of course, our body, our hands, our eyes, our faces, these are all different channels that we use to communicate non-verbally. Now, another channel of nonverbal communication is our distance. This is another body method. We call this proxemics. Distances that we hold ourselves towards another person. So, what is an intimate distance? How much is an intimate distance? When people are intimate, when they're really, really close with each other, how much distance can they have between each other? Practically none, right? They can actually be touching, right? So if people are touching, and they're touching frequently, they're touching abundantly, then you realize that the distance between them is practically non-existent. And that's what we mean by an intimate distance. Now with other people, we keep personal distance. An average personal distance between two people talking usually could be, 3 feet or something like that. Could be 4 feet, depends whatever people are comfortable with. Usually it's the reach of your hand, okay? This is the rule in the West. If I can reach you and touch you with the hand, that's close enough, okay? Does that make sense? People do not like to be closer than a hand reach in the West. I know in other cultures it's completely different. All right, if you go to Latin America, people will be about a half of a hand, sometimes less than a half of a stretched hand away from you. And they're not trying to get intimate with you. This is just their distance, their personal distance is different, okay? So in some countries, being close does not mean we're friends, it's just they are like that, all right? So there's the intimate distance, then there's the personal distance. That means we're communicating, but we still have some sort of relationship, but I want to keep a certain amount of distance. Then there's a social distance, and that means like right now. Okay, right now, interestingly enough, you guys are sitting so evenly spread out from each other. Okay, this is like really interesting to me. Each one of you have picked a place in the class that separates you by at least 2 desks from each other. Neither one of you, this is a funny experiment, right? But right now, this is a great illustration of social distance. There's a couple of desks between each one of you. Now you could have all sat right here, all of you. There's not that many of you. You could have all sat right here in this section, in the middle, really clustered right next to each other. Okay, you could have all sat on the left. You could have all sat on the right. But for some reason, you decided to spread out evenly. You are the same distance separated from each one in this class. Now, I don't know why you did it. I don't know what that means, okay? But that is how you guys feel comfortable right now. You want a little distance. You want a little space. Whatever that means, okay? But this is what we call social distance. I'm comfortable being with you at this distance in this environment. Now, if you sat that far, if you went to have lunch together and you sat that far away from each other, that wouldn't be good, right? Because that means saying, I don't want to be with you, right? That's like too far away. But for this particular setting, for a classroom, or for a meeting where we're having a business meeting and you're sitting on the other side of the room from me, at a comfortable distance, a chair or 2 away is okay, But if we're having a personal moment, I would expect for you to move right next to me, right? And sit close. So that's the idea. That's social distance, and then there's public distance. Public distance is even more. When somebody's giving a speech and they're separated from the rest of the people, far away, that's public distance, okay? So what we're having here in class, for example, is something between a social distance and a public distance. That's normal. And so the textbook, if you look at the textbook, they'll actually give you even number of feet, the suggested number of feet that you're supposed to be away from the person to designate what type of a distance you're experiencing. All right. So we're continuing along the lines of this idea of nonverbal behavior and what channels we're using. So we talked about using your eyes, your face, your hands, you know, now we're talking more about your body. We're talking proximity, how close you're standing to somebody. Okay, and this is a very interesting facet of our human communication to consider, and that is our territoriality. Okay, humans tend to be kind of territorial. It's very interesting. People have studied human beings, and we tend to like our turf, and we like to hold on to our territory. Whatever we mean by that is different from culture to culture, but we kind of have our spaces, and we like our spaces just certain. So when somebody intrudes on that, we make adaptations or adjustments, and that actually means something to us. We react, we communicate accordingly, okay? So we have our territories, like a place that you own, for example, your living space or your bedroom, let's put it that way, a place where you sleep. Very, very personal, okay? A lot of people do not like to be intruded on. You can come visit me in my house, but you're not going to my bedroom. You're going to stay in the living room, right? Not inviting you to my bedroom. So things like that. So basically there's these, our primary territories is things we like to keep private. You know, our secondary territories is things that we don't mind sharing. And then we have public territories like here. Here we are in public. Obviously we're sharing that space, and we don't mind sharing that space. And the fact that somebody else comes into the space is not going to bother us, right? So we are territorial, but there's degrees to how we feel of people intruding upon our territory. So we do communicate our privacy also in this way, by actual spaces that we inhibit. All right. Some people like to, what we call, mark their territory. Have you guys ever seen animals mark their territory? So cats do that, dogs do that, lots of animals in the wild do that as well. Now a lot of times they do that with scent, which is kind of gross. We don't do that with scent a lot of times. We do that with a personal touch. We do that with a personal touch. So I like your laptop, by the way, and I like that you marked it. Your laptop is marked. So you know how I know? Because there's a bunch of stickers on the front. I see Lego, I see Elmo, you know, I see cool stuff. You marked it, you made it personal. You are saying, it's mine. That's what you're saying. I know you're laughing. You marked your laptop. So if I walk into a room and I see your laptop and I see several other laptops, I'm gonna like, okay, that's hers, I'm not taking it. This is mine, but hers is very marked. I'm not taking it. That's hers. See what I mean? Isn't that funny? That's what we do. That's non-verbal behavior. Oh, look, your laptop is marked too. You got some stickers on it too. I'm just saying, this is what we do. That's what we do. We take something and we make it personal to us. I walk into your living room and you made it yours by putting certain things in your living room that express you, or your bedroom even more so. Something that's more private. The more private it is, the more you mark it. So people do this in their offices. They put things in their offices to demonstrate themselves. So some people do that to express who they are. Some people just say it's mine. Other people say this is who I am. Other people want to create a boundary where they're basically saying, you know, this is, do not cross, you know. This is it. This is my territory. This is my world you're crossing into. So this is what we do. And we do this with our possessions. I mean, why do people put bumper stickers on their cars? It does really nothing, you know, except marks possession, something like that. Why do people do certain things? Why do they customize it? You know, it's just, these are ways in which we express our territoriality, let's put it that way, as human beings. So this is our nonverbal messages that we use to regulate our relationship, regulate distance from other people or proximity from those people. Now, we do communicate with artifacts. You know, we do use color to communicate. We use clothing, we use jewelry to communicate. Okay? We use hairstyles to communicate. Body piercings, tattoos, all these different things. All sorts of devices, or what we call artifacts. Anything that is physical, anything that's physiological, anything that can be touched, anything that's tangible, we can refer to it as an artifact. Okay? So we use those to communicate. So what can jewelry communicate, for example? Tell me, just top of your head, what do you think jewelry communicates?
Wedding.
A wedding ring communicates, obviously, hey, I'm married, okay, so that's an obvious one. But let's say I have 15 rings on my fingers. What does it communicate? Rich, if they're all made out of real stuff, right? If I've got like 15 different rings and they're all like gold and diamonds, then I'm like, wow, this guy is wealthy, he's got a lot. You know, another person would just go buy a nice car, right? But I got rings. So I'm trying also to maybe get your attention, maybe kind of sort of, because it's one thing to wear one ring or two rings or three rings, but 15, you know, think about it. More than one per finger, right? Now that is really going over the top. So I am trying to communicate something, right? If anything, I want you to pay attention to my hands. Let's say I don't feel so good about my face. I don't want you looking at my face. I want you looking at my hands. So I'm going to put a lot of rings on my hands because I want to take attention away from my face. Because I'm not comfortable with my face. I don't like the way my face looks. So I just want you to look at my hands. Same thing with tattoos or whatever. Or anything that we do to our bodies. Piercing our bodies or clothing. If I want to communicate success, professionalism, you know, I'm going to dress a certain way. If I want to communicate relax, that I'm relaxed, that I'm easy, that I'm just having a good time, I'm comfortable, I would dress a different way. You know, it's just normal. We use clothes to communicate. We use expensive clothes to communicate that we have means, we have money, we're not poor, we can afford things. We show our status, our class, essentially. We're saying, hey, I'm somebody who has money to buy clothes that's brand name. So I'm going to wear this brand name and I'm going to show it off to everyone. Why do you think people spend lots of effort to make fake stuff that looks just like the brand name stuff? You know, why do you think people do that? Because showing off a brand is basically communicating prestige, class, money. What happens if you don't fake? I can't afford a Rolex, so I'm going to buy a fake Rolex. It's going to look just like the real one, and from a distance, you're actually going to think that I have a real Rolex, but I don't have money for a Rolex, so I'm just going to wear a fake one. Why not just wear any watch? No, I want you to think that I'm rich, so I'm just going to wear a fake Rolex. You see what I mean? We do this. We use communication with artifacts, whether it be clothing or jewelry or hairstyle. You know, some people have these crazy hairstyles. They want people to pay attention to them, so they have this unusual hairstyle that's better than everybody else's, that stands out, makes them stand out in the crowd. You know, why do people do things to accentuate themselves? There are reasons, there always are. what we could say is whatever they're communicating, they are communicating. And that's what they're doing. So, decorating your space, decorating your room, decorating your office. You come into a person's office and you see all these different things in their office. All of a sudden, it tells you a little bit about who they are. Now, another channel of nonverbal communication is smell. Olfactory senses are very powerful sometimes in human beings. And in some cultures, smell is more important than others. And hygiene and things like that. So, for example, using a cologne or perfume or something like that, people use that a lot. Have you ever been around a person who has used way too much perfume or cologne? Have you? I find it annoying, for example. Like, there's just so much, it's like, okay. But then there's too much, where a person just like drowned themselves in it. And I'm like, what just happened, you know? So it's really funny. But people notice that. And for some people it's a big deal, for other people it's not a big deal. But we do communicate with our cologne. I used to travel for work all the time. And so I would go to the airport all the time, and I always go park my car in one of those parking lots that are just a distance from the airport, and I will take a shuttle. And so there was this one lady, this one particular driver, that she would drive my route all the time. She would pick people up and take them, and so after a while, you know, because I was flying so much, she would pick me up all the time. And I think a second or third time I got into her bus, you know, she's like, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you." I'm like, "Okay, I'm glad to see you too." She goes, "I always like when you ride with me." And I'm like, "Why? What do I do that anybody else doesn't do?" She goes, "I like your cologne." She goes, "You smell good." She says, like, people come into my vehicle and they leave my vehicle. And what they don't realize is I'm here all the time. And people come in, and if they smell bad, they leave and that smell hangs. And if they smell good, they come and they leave and that smell stays. And so then she starts telling me all these stories about people coming in, having too much cologne or smelling like they haven't bathed in 7 weeks or something like that. They tell me all these, starts telling me all these stories, and I realized how important it is to her. And how, to her, that's a really powerful communication smell. That lady doesn't know anything about me, but she likes me. Why? Because I make her space smell good. She likes my cologne. She actually asks me, "What are you wearing?" I'm like, "What do you mean what I'm wearing?" She goes, "Your cologne. I want to know what it is." So I told her what it was, but you know, but the idea is that people sometimes do this. You know, we do communicate even with smell. That's nonverbal for sure, because we're certainly not saying anything. And then, scent can identify a person. You see what I mean? So I'm gone from her car, but she still remembers me. Why? Because the scent of my cologne is still there in the car. So it's like, for her, she now associates me with that cologne. So that forever in her mind, if she ever smells somebody wearing the same cologne, she'll think about me, actually. So it's kind of funny. But here it is. It's just, you know, a casual relationship. You know, she's a driver. That's what she does. And I'm just a passenger. Another channel of nonverbal communication is touch. All right, so we touch each other. Some people are much more touchy. Other people are less touchy. Have you ever been around people who are touchier than you are, or too touchy? Come on, you can share it with me. Ever felt uncomfortable by somebody touching you where you didn't really want to? They're too friendly. Like, wait a minute, I don't know you. But a person goes and tries to give you a hug. And you're like, I don't even know your name. But you're trying to hug me. Like, that's too friendly, right? So a handshake, you know, we're okay with that. But like, you know, touch, you know, like that is too much, you know. Or sometimes people kiss on a cheek. I'm like, I don't want your lips touching me. I don't know who you are. I don't know who you kissed 5 minutes ago. Some people are much more averse to touch than others. And there's reasons for that. Some of them are cultural, some of them are religious, you know, so there are different things. And some cultures and religions Genders are not supposed to touch unless they are actually related or married. You know, it's just inappropriate. Just inappropriate. You can bow, you can shake hands, but no huggy kissy. That's not happening. In other cultures, everything is appropriate, and being very, very touchy is not an issue at all. So, what does touch express? Well, for one thing, it expresses emotions. We know that. It can express playfulness. It can express control. You can control a person with a touch, right? You can express a ritual with a touch, right? So, or you can, or your touch can be related to something you're doing. You know, for example, if you're riding if I'm a limo driver and you're riding in my limo, and I open the door for you. If you're a lady, I would hold out my hand, and I would expect for you to put your hand on mine and help you step out of the limo. That's a normal thing to do. That's what we call the task-oriented touch. I'm helping you out of the car, right? Has nothing to do whether I like you or I don't like you. This is my job. I'm doing my job by touching you. Things like that. So, ritual touch. What would be a ritual touch? Give me an example. Baptism, yeah. How many times do you let anybody dunk you in the water or someone? You know, who gets to do that? Except maybe when you were a baby and your parents bathed you or something like that, right? Normally that doesn't happen, right? But in this situation, it's considered to be appropriate, right? So it's normal. So yeah, that's a good example of a ritual, and we do have lots of rituals that basically involve touch. Sometimes people pray for each other, right? And when they pray for each other, they put a hand on that person. Now, normally you wouldn't put a hand on that person. You don't even know that person. But because you're praying for that person, you put a hand on that person, right? And that's considered to be socially and culturally acceptable. Now, what if you weren't praying for the person, you just came over and just put the hand on them? They would feel weird, right? They were like, what are you doing? So you see how we are communicating something through touch. And it's just, a lot of times people get confused on what is communicated through touch, because that could be a very, let's put it this way, you could be very easily misinterpreted, because touching means different things in different cultures and in different contexts and in different settings, and that human beings feel very diverse, array of feelings and emotions, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate when it comes to touch. I want to talk a little bit about silence. I don't know if you realize this or not, but silence can be a form of nonverbal communication. So by being silent, you're actually not communicating, right? You think, I'm not saying anything, I'm being silent. But by being silent, you are saying something. You actually are expressing a feeling or an emotion or a particular disposition. So we have this idea of, maybe you've heard this, and this is an idiomatic expression in English, giving a person a silent treatment. Silent treatment. So if you're friends with somebody and you talk frequently all the time, and then all of a sudden you meet them and they don't want to talk to you. And then second day goes by and still don't say anything. Third day goes by, they don't say anything. So all of a sudden you realize something is not right between us. Because normally we talk every day, multiple times, but all of a sudden you're not talking to me. What happens? You know something is wrong even though they haven't said anything. They didn't say, I'm mad at you, I'm upset at you, or something like that. They didn't say a thing. In fact, not saying anything is already a communication of letting you know, hey, something is not right between us. Because our relationship changed. I'm not talking to you the way I normally do. So there's a silence as a technique, as a nonverbal communication, and then there's silence as in not making a sound, you know, as far as not pronouncing anything. Those are two different things. You know, in that sense, we differentiate between them. Another aspect of how we communicate without saying anything is our communication through time. Okay, our temporal communication. I know that you probably realize this, that people conceive time differently in different cultures. What you think time is and how you think whether time is important or unimportant bears a difference on how you communicate with people. Some people speak slowly, right? They take their time. Other people speak very fast. They go on and on and on. Some people have sort of say an idea that there's always more time to be found. Other people believe that time can run out. The time expires. The time is like running away and you can't capture it. And other people say time is like air. There's more of it. There's always more of it. So these are conceptual or philosophical ideas about time that actually influence how people communicate and how they treat periods of time within their communication. Okay? A lot of that has to do with what scientists understand as a psychological understanding of time. There are people who have an orientation towards time that's called past orientation. Others have present orientation, and others have future orientation. And what we mean by an orientation towards time is how do you judge time, basically. Right? Somebody who always looks at the past to determine what's happening now, or to determine what happens in the future. Like imagine going through life and making a decision, right? And you're making a particular decision, and how do you make that decision? Now, a person who has a past orientation is going to look and say, what decisions have I made in the past about this issue? What others have made, the other decisions, how did it work out for them? And then I make my decision based on what happened before with the same situation or a similar situation. It could be me, it could be somebody else, but I'm still looking into the past to make a decision. Now, that will probably carry me into the future, right? So that's a past orientation towards time. I'm dwelling in the past. I'm thinking of the past. Even as if I'm acting now, I'm still thinking about how it was before, okay? The person who has a present orientation towards time rarely thinks about what happened in the past. It doesn't think much about what will happen in the future. They think about what it feels like now. What will it do for me now, right now, this second, okay? They're not focused on what's going to happen next. They don't really care what happened in the past, because what happened in the past doesn't matter. Maybe what's happening now is very different from what happened in the past. Just because it happened that way in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen the same way now. Things have changed, right? So a person can have a very much now orientation to time. And another person can have a very future orientation to time, where they're making a decision right now and they realize that what happens right now is not as important than what's going to happen a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, or decades from now. I mean, this is how people in life every single day. People say, I want to get married, right? And I want to marry you. And then just like, I like you. Well, why do you like me? Because I look, a certain way, or something like that. I find you attractive. Well, what happens in 20 years when I'm no longer attractive? When I gain a bunch of weight, or my hair turns gray, or whatever. Well, you're going to say, well, then I won't find you attractive anymore. It's like, well, then you do not want to be married to me. Well, I don't care. So I want now. I want to get married now. I don't want to be married 20 years from now. I want to be married now. So you see, a person who looks at life and says, it's all about now, is going to have a very different perspective than a person who looks at life and is going to say, what's it going to look 20 years from now? Will I still like my decision that I'm making 20 years from now into the future? You know, things like that. Your orientation towards time, your psychological understanding of time will determine how you make decisions and what decisions you make and how wisely you make those decisions and choices that you make in life. And it will also determine how you communicate. It is very closely tied to, you know, how you express yourself. So on the interpersonal level, different people have ideas about time and values about time they express. For example, punctuality, coming to somewhere on time, be it on time, promising to be on time, making appointments, segmenting time, okay? Waiting for somebody, you know, some people are patient, other people are impatient. So I lived in a place where people were very, very impatient for quite a long time. And after living there for a long time, I became a very impatient person because I was surrounded by a bunch of impatient people. So when it comes to how much time should you talk, you know, like for example, think about it. What is a normal conversation with friends? If you meet a friend, let's say you're going somewhere and you bump into a friend, what is a proper length of time for you to speak to each other? Do you just say hi and then move on? Or do you say hi, how's it going? Make a little small chat, talk to them for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 hours? Like what is an appropriate time? Like when do you cut off and you say, okay, that was enough. That conversation was long enough. I don't want to talk anymore. Like people have a time limit in their head of what they consider appropriate conversation between friends. You know, how long can it go on? And that usually depends on their level of intimacy, how close they are to that person. But somebody that I know as a coworker, you know, like I consider talking to my coworker an average person, you know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes on an average day. I'm certainly not going to talk to them 4 or 5 hours unless we're really close coworkers and we're actually friends. You know, so just chatting in the office, talking about, you know, business and things that we're doing, a few minutes is considered enough. Now, just saying hello and never talking to them, actually, I think would make me feel like I'm being rude or not friendly. So I have my limit of what I consider a talk time, depending on relationships. And so, and the same thing, relationship time. How much time do you spend in a relationship with a person? How much time do you spend responding to a person? You know, if you text somebody, how quickly do you expect to hear back? If you email somebody, what is your expectation of how fast that email needs to be responded? What is an expectation? What is your expectation? Like I tell my students, I'll respond to your email within a day or two, unless it falls over the weekend. Then it might be longer, because I might actually not check my email over the weekend, because I got other things to do. You know, I'm not at work on the weekends. So you email my work email, I may not answer until Monday or Tuesday. If it came on Friday night, I may not answer it until Monday or Tuesday. And that's normal, you know. So texts, you know, emails like wait time, how long do you wait? If a person says something, how long do you wait before you answer? What is an acceptable time to wait? All of that is going to be different from culture to culture and person to person as well. But all of that goes into your value of time. How do you see time? What is your orientation of time? Depending on your time orientation, you will treat other people differently with that. So there is this idea of cultural time, and formal time and informal time. Different cultures value time differently, and so for example, with promptness and things like that, this is notorious. For example, like in Latin America, if you invite somebody to a dinner and they come on time, it's actually considered rude. They won't come on time because their culture tells them to come an hour late. So just keep in mind. Now, here in America it's different, but in Latin America, it's normal. So in America, it might be okay. And so I used to go to this Argentine restaurant all the time, and I would meet my friend from Argentina, and we'd make an appointment. Meet me at 6, and he would show up at 7 every single time. And I don't mind, I'll sit there in the restaurant and wait for him because I know this is absolutely normal for him. He wouldn't come at 6 because it's okay. And the waiters in the restaurant, they know that I'm here because I'm the American, right? But the other guy is going to come in an hour or so. And they know that, and it doesn't bother them. And because that's their cultural expectation of how this appointment is going to happen. Now, there is formal time and then there's an informal time. There's business time and personal time. There's monochronic and polychronic way of looking at time. Formal time and informal time look as this way. America breaks down time into hours, minutes, sometimes seconds. You know, you got days, hours, minutes, seconds. This is how people measure time. Now, a lot of people in other cultures do not do that. I mean, if you look at your Google Calendar and you schedule an appointment, if you notice, Google Calendar schedule appointments in 30-minute increments automatically by default. Culturally speaking, Google has predetermined that you shouldn't have a meeting that lasts longer than 30 minutes. Or they will schedule a business meeting for an hour, not more than an hour, like that's it. Like automatically, if I put in a meeting with somebody, it will give me an hour. Like, why does it not give me 5 hours to have a meeting? Because culturally speaking, that's the value of time that Google is projecting. So there's this, it's all about how does your culture measure time. Some people see that, time is, it has no meaning to them in a sense. Like if I say, hey, let's get together, and I say, I'll see you soon, right? And that soon could be 5 months from now, right? And that's okay, because to me, that's what it means. To me, that's soon. But to another person, soon means like next day or next week. Again, it all really is different depending on how you treat time. Is time something formal for you, or is time something informal for you? Are you rigid with time, or are you flexible with time? Different cultures and different places feel differently about that. And that, makes communication a little bit different because where you're from makes a big difference of how you communicate. All right. The monochronic versus the polychronic orientation. Monochronic people like to kind of do one task at a time, right? So I have a meeting with you, then I have a meeting with you, then I have lunch, then I have a meeting with him, then I have a meeting with her. And that's how we do it in a monochronic culture. In polychronic culture, I have a meeting with you, and somewhere in the middle I'm going to run out for lunch. See what just happened? I actually scheduled all of you at once, and I was going to sort it out later on and figure out who goes first and who goes last if I have to meet with you individually. Unless I may actually meet with all of you simultaneously, And for a polychronic person, that's not going to bother them. So it's almost like single task oriented person versus multitask oriented person. I don't know what you are like. Some people are good with doing one task, finishing it, moving to another task. Other people will do 5 tasks at the same time, and they will be good at it, and they're fine, and they can very easily multitask, and it doesn't bother them at all. That has to do a lot with your personality, has to do with your culture, it has to do with how you're raised. The same thing can happen in various aspects of our life. But that's the monochromic versus polychronic. That's what we mean. Okay. Let's see. And then there's this idea of a social clock. You know what a social clock is? Social clock is when you realize that by certain time, you should achieve certain milestones. For example, tell me, in your culture, where you come from, when are girls expected to marry? By what age? Like, if a girl is not married by that age, she is looked upon as weird. What age would that be? Tell me. Come on, girls, help me out, because you know this better. But, so in your culture, Korean culture, girls are expected to marry by what age? I'm not saying you personally, but just culture, everyone, generally. What age? 30. So if you're not married and you're 30, you're like, okay, something's wrong, right? May not be anything wrong with it, but the point is the culture, the social expectation for you to be married by 30. If you're 35 and you're not married, okay, like you're saying that person missed their time, missed it, missed an opportunity to get married. Now nobody's going to marry you because you're over 30 and you're done. You know, that's a social time, social clock. How about this? By what time are you supposed to, you know, complete your education, go to college or whatever? You know, are you expected? So like if you're 50 years old and you sign up for college, what do people think about you? They're like, what are you doing here, right? You got just a few years before you're going to retire. Why are you starting your college degree right now? So there's these social expectations of when you're supposed to do this, when you're supposed to do that. You should be finished with college by age such and such. You should be getting married by age such and such. You should be having children by age such and such. You know, you should be buying a house or getting a career or a job by age such and such. So like things like that. So like for example, you know, I know that, you know, in Asia it's very different, but in America, living with your parents is considered to be, for an adult, is not considered to be a good thing. Like I know that in Asia, families live together for a long time, and generations, and forever, that's okay. But in America, an adult becomes a mature adult, they get their own place. They move out, they have independent life. They construct life separately. They become a self-functioning unit apart from their parents and their family and things like that. So staying at home when you're 35 or 40 years old, living like in your mother's house or your father's house or something like that, is considered to be, in America, a bad thing. It's considered to be, oh, that person is not mature. That person is not responsible. That person is not good enough with their life to achieve a level of independence. They live with their parents. Now, in other cultures, people do that not because they can't achieve, but because they choose to live like that, because their social order is very different, you know, and that's fine. So this is what I mean by these things. Now, this brings me to the third section, and that is guidelines, how to improve our nonverbal communication. We talked about all that goes into nonverbal communication. We talked about the channels, the different avenues, the methods that we use to communicate nonverbally. Now let's talk about how do we get better? How can we improve ourselves when it comes to communicating nonverbally? Well, there's a few suggestions that the authors of this textbook give us. And that is, these are all good, very good, sensible suggestions. Decoding skills. Decoding means understanding. So when you communicate non-verbally, I have to interpret that, okay? Whatever it is that you do non-verbally, I have to try to assign a meaning to that. This person behaves this way, therefore it means that. And you do that in your brain, you know, within seconds, just microseconds sometimes. A person's disposition, whatever I notice, whatever I perceive, I immediately try to interpret and assign a meaning to. That's what we do. We talked about perception, the very idea of perception. So when we are decoding this nonverbal communication, we should resist leaping to conclusions. So that means take a little bit more time to decode. Don't judge too quickly, essentially. Seek alternative explanations. When you see somebody acting a certain way and it looks like this, consider what other possibilities that can mean. What is the alternative? Maybe you're misreading them, basically. Consider the possibility that you are incorrect. Say, wait a minute. I may not be accurate in understanding what's going on here. I may be misreading them. Use a baseline of behavior. So if a person usually is behaving like that, and all of a sudden they start behaving differently, you have to establish a baseline. Okay? So like my baseline with you guys is that you're quiet and you don't talk in class. That's my baseline with you. So if one morning you showed up and you started raising hands, like nonstop all the time, I'd figure out something's really wrong with you. Okay? Right away. Why? Because you never do this. Because we've been 5th week in class and I don't think any one of you have ever raised a hand. I've established a baseline. Okay? That's normal at this point. Right? That's how I see it. So you measure things against the baseline. And that means taking some time to establish what that is. Okay? And then interpret your conclusions against the cultural context. So if my American students never raise their hands, I would be very worried. But my cultural expectations of you are a little bit different. So I'm not as worried. Although it makes it difficult for me anyway, because I'm used to teaching in a classroom where people do raise their hands, do ask questions, do jump into the conversation and discussion on the things that we're talking about, things like that. But, you know, that's my cultural understanding that that's probably not going to happen, because that's not how you expect this classroom to work out. Okay. Consider the multitude of factors that can influence the way a person behaves non-verbally. Again, this is reiteration. Basically, don't judge too quick. Consider what's really going on. So that's us understanding how another person behaves non-verbally. Okay, so if I am watching and I'm seeing certain non-verbal cues, I kind of run through this list saying, wait a minute, let me make sure, okay, that I'm getting this right. Now, the other side, the decoding is one side, the encoding, because all of us are receivers of nonverbal communication, but all of us are also givers of the nonverbal communication. All of us do that ourselves. And so as communicators ourselves, what we should do is we should monitor our nonverbal messages with the same care that we monitor our verbal messages. Okay? So some people watch what they say very carefully, but they don't watch what they do just as carefully. And the idea is that we need to watch our body language just as much as we watch our actual language. Keep your nonverbal messages consistent with your verbal messages. So don't miscommunicate by saying one thing verbally and another thing non-verbally. It really confuses people. Really, really does. Take this situation into consideration. So basically adjust your nonverbal communication based on the circumstances. In some circumstances you might want to communicate nonverbally more, in other situations you may not. In other situations you may want to rely on a verbal communication. So for example, in different, let's take it the classroom again. When I'm asking you a question and I want to hear an answer, I don't want nonverbal communication. I actually want a verbal communication. I actually do want an audible response. Why? Because that's what I'm asking for. So if you give me something else that's not what I'm asking for, or if you ignore my question, that just makes me feel completely inadequate. Then why am I even doing this? Because the person is not even giving me attention. Things like that. So you have to take situation into consideration and you have to adapt. You have to adapt your encoding skills. Sometimes it may put you in an uncomfortable situation, but you still have to do it. Be careful with touching. This is, again, a very cultural issue. Some cultures are touchy, other cultures are not. And if you're mindful of that, then you'll be okay. It's just some people think that everybody is just like them. So if they're touchy, they want to touch everybody, which gets them into trouble. Avoid strong cologne and perfume, or any scent that may be overwhelming or unpleasant to others. Some people are, of course, very sensitive to olfactory causes, and so that is a problem for them. So that's also part of etiquette and culture and nonverbal communication. All right, just quick summary, and we'll tie this together, and you guys are free to go after this for the conclusion of our class. So nonverbal messages interact with verbal. We've already established that. They're connected, they're tied. They should, okay? That's the nature of them. Nonverbal messages help us manage how we are perceived, our impressions. So that means what you do nonverbally will get you liked or not liked, respected or disrespected, followed or ignored. Whatever you're trying to achieve, you can achieve it verbally and nonverbally, okay? Nonverbal messages help us form relationships and maintain relationships. So we use nonverbal communication in our relationships, whether they're casual, formal, distant, or intimate. All of that works. Nonverbal messages structure our conversation. We can signal people when it's okay to talk or when it's not okay to talk, when I want you to listen or wait, pause, give me a minute kind of thing. So they provide structure, and they can also influence and deceive. Non-verbally, we can send messages and signals that are inappropriate and are untrue, okay? We can trick people and deceive people with nonverbal communication as well, just as much as we can do with our words. We can lie with words, we can lie with actions. I could tell you that I like something when I really don't. You know what I mean? You invite me over for dinner, you say, hey, Professor Peter, try this new food. And you put this food in front of me, and I taste it, and it tastes awful. And I, out of politeness, say, oh yeah, that's very nice. What I'm doing is I'm deceiving you, because I don't want you to feel bad that I don't like your food. So because that's a cultural, sensitive area, so I'm going to say, in fact, I'm going to eat a little bit more of that. Even if I don't like it, I'm still going to eat more. Why? Because I want you to feel good. Because my relationship with you is more important than me not liking that food. So I'm saying, sacrifice my dislike of the food and eat it anyway, because my relationship is more important. So anyway, that's an ethical issue that people have to do, but we can mislead people and influence people by how we behave non-verbally. And then also nonverbal messages are crucial for expressing our emotions. If we choose not to express our emotions through nonverbal messages, sometimes it's hard to read people, it's hard to know what they are, and it's hard to adapt our communication. Remember how we talked about in communication, there's feedback, right? When I communicate to you, you communicate back to me by providing feedback. If the feedback that you provide is practically non-existent, then I don't know how to adjust my communication, okay? If I am boring, but you don't show to me that I'm boring, then I can't change the way I speak, and I will bore you to death. The same thing if you find it interesting, and you don't show me that it's interesting, then I have no idea that I'm actually hitting that success level, and if you didn't show it to me, then I have no idea, and I can't give you more of that, because you never expressed it. So holding back your emotions and holding back your nonverbal cues actually in communication impedes communication quite a bit, makes it difficult. Anyway, that's our summary. That's pretty much it.